Hello readers and welcome back to Tell Between Tales. Today we are going to be discussing Immortal Dark by Tegest Girma. I am maybe a little bit obsessed with this book and I have a lot of thoughts. This book is not perfect by any means, but there are some very interesting themes and I am obsessed with vampires and it is a vampire book, so that's always right up my alley. And so let's go ahead and delve in. The first thing that I want to talk about it, since I put it on my thumbnail, is that Tegest Girma had an agenda when writing this book, basically. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that that's wonderful because she talks about in here, we've got a letter from her, from Owl Crate. And so I want to read you her letter. She says, Dear Owl Crate reader, I grew up in Ethiopia in a dense, fast-moving city. My earliest memory of books was tugging on my mother's hand in the middle of the street and racing towards the books spilling across vendors' carpets. That's where I fell in love with monster-slaying stories. When I turned 14, I found books where those monsters were loved instead of killed, revered instead of feared. It changed my whole world. In Immortal Dark, you will find traces of all things I love. Vampires originated from Africa, a confrontation with darkness, and a dangerous, all-consuming love. This book asks my favorite question, who is the monster and who is the human? And is there any difference at all? Yours eternally, Tegest. And I want to talk about that a little bit more in just a second, but also we are going to also move into right here at the dedication page. This is dedicated for the Black girls who've always marveled at the dark beauty of vampires. The immortals look like us in this one. So what I want to know is, obviously, I'm not Black. I'm very white. And I still enjoyed this book, but I want to know, because this book was written for Black girls, Black women. And I want to know if you've read this, how that affected you, if like you were grateful for a book like this. I mean, obviously growing up and all of the vampire novels that I read, pretty much they were all white. So I am very much removed from the idea of not being able to connect with the characters or feel like, oh, I wish there was someone who looked like me. And I know that's a lot of white privilege, but so I'm very interested to hear from some Black women who have read this book, and I have watched some YouTube videos. There's not a whole ton that I could find of YouTube videos out there, especially ones done by, I mean, there's a good handful of them, about this book specifically, and I'm interested in how the themes that she talks about in here really affected you, because she talks about it a lot. I feel like she uses the descriptions, she's constantly reminding us of how dark the skin tones are and describing skin color as, there's scenes where like the male vampires are taking off their shirts or whatever, and even our main character, Kadan, you're just talking about her dark skin and the braids in her hair. She wears her hair braided. And our main vampire, Sisenyos, his hair as well, like he talks about his curls or I think his rolls, because he's got his hair, I think it's in corn rolls. So anyway, it talks a lot about that, and I feel like it's definitely constantly reminding us that these are vampires that are not white. They're Black. They're from Africa. There's a lot of African culture in here, and from Ethiopia as well, which is where she grew up. So I think it is great that she has a lot of that in her books, and she addresses that a lot. And it'll keep popping up kind of here and there. And so I am definitely interested to hear in the comments about what you thought and how it affected you as a reader. In contrast, I wanted to talk about Amari and the Night Brothers, just super quick, because that is a YA, middle grade. This is a middle grade book. This is YA, although I don't know if it should be classified as YA. That's a little bit of a controversy. We'll talk about that in a second. There's a lot to talk about in this book. Yeah, by B.B. Alston, Amari and the Night Brothers. That is a great book where it has a main female character who is Black. And that book is not constantly reminding you that she is Black and these other characters are Black. And so there is very much an awareness in this book about that. So now let's get into it. So Immortal Dark is a dark academia vampire novel. And we have our main character, Kadan, or Kadan. I'm going to say it's Kadan from here on out. And our main vampire is Susenyos. And the name of the university is Uxley. This may not be correct pronunciation, but that's the way it's going to be for the rest of the video. So Kadan and her sister, her twin sister, they were raised outside of this community. So Uxley is a university for vampires and humans where they combine together to work and live alongside each other as companions. And we learn more, of course, about that society and how that all came to happen throughout the book. But essentially, long time ago, vampires were very, very powerful. And a counterpart to vampires, there were these people called sages. And the sages, their power seems to have completely died out. There are no more sages. But the last sage bound the vampires to the three binds. And they talk about that very, very early on in the book. This is one of my very first tabs that I have in here. It's like at the end of the first chapter. So I don't think it's very spoilery, but I won't go over all of them in case you don't want to know. But one of the three binds that's important to what we're talking about right now for the spoiler-free section is that vampires cannot just drink from anybody. There's basically 80 families where vampires are allowed to drink from those families only. And our main characters are, of course, they come from one of those 80 bloodlines. However, of those 80 bloodlines, only 12, I believe, 12 families came together to form Uxley University. And the rest are all called rogue vampires. But we don't get a whole lot of information about them because we really are focused on Uxley. And so Kadan and her sister June, they are twins and they come from the Adane house. And they are the last living heirs to the Adane house because they were raised in their house when they were young and then their parents died and their aunt removed them from this world, this society basically, and they were raised in a foster home with Mama Aonette, I believe is how you pronounce that. Anyway, the first, I almost got into discussions. Got to keep it straight in my head. We're doing spoiler free. Okay, so it opens up and we're following Kadan, who is definitely our main character. Everything is told from her point of view. And she is very much traumatized. She's just gone. She's 18, maybe 19. On her 18th birthday or around abouts, her sister was taken by a vampire. And she saw through the glass a vampire, a shadow, come and take her and run off with her. And she is bound and determined to get her sister back. And so she has basically committed murder in the beginning of the book. You find that out in the prologue. And the reason why is because she's trying to find out who took her sister. And so she's been sending letters to Uxley and not really been getting anything back. But then her aunt dies and basically leaves her the sole heir of a Dane house. And so Uxley University reaches out and says, you can come and inherit your house. If you don't, then Susenyos, who is your house vampire, is going to inherit the house as pertains to your parents' will. Now she believes and is accusing Cesennios of stealing her sister, and so she does not want him to inherit the house. And this is really what gets her to come to Uxley University, because she doesn't want anything to do with the vampires. She believes that they're all evil and that they're all dark and that they all need to be destroyed, and that the society is just a terrible society. And this theme of destroy all evil comes up a lot. And because she has committed murder before the book even began, she of course includes herself in that. Kanan is a very, I don't know if she's not so much conflicted as she's definitely a very traumatized character. She's definitely got a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder, and she has a lot of self-loathing. It can be hard to read from her perspective a lot of times, because she hates herself so much because she failed her sister. She hasn't been able to find her, and of course she loathes herself for killing, and also because she almost felt like a sick sense of joy in that, like, I've done something to help find my sister and to help avenge my sister. And so she has a huge internal struggle throughout the book about basically life or death. Should I live or should I die? And that's one of the warnings. So at the beginning of this book, they have a warning section right here, a content warning. And it says, Immortal Dark explores the savage world of vampires and humans who try to survive it. It features some heavy elements such as parental abuse, blood drinking, death, gore, murder, sexual content, strong language, suicide ideation, and violence. And the suicide ideation is what I wanted to talk about. That's why I read it right now, because Kadan, with how much she loathes herself, it's every day for her is a choice between life and death. And she wears death in a bracelet around her wrist. She's got a little blue suicide pill. And she has to choose every day, am I going to end it today? And so her journey, it's a dark journey. It's a sad journey. She's full of anger. She's very judgmental. She comes into this society where she doesn't know anybody, and she's immediately judging them and saying that, and she's not necessarily saying that I'm better than you, because she sees herself as like on level with everyone, as evil that needs to be destroyed as well, like I'm going to burn along with you type of a thing. But as she's going through and the story unfolds and she's meeting more people, she learns more about their world, and she starts to learn that some of the judgments that she has made are not exactly maybe correct, and she starts to see how maybe her viewpoint was maybe a little harsh, and she can start seeing the good in the society to an extent. So a lot of the book is about her needing to pass this class called Dronacti, which is the merging of vampires and their human companions. Say hello. Say hello. Yeah. And so she forms a study group in order to do this, because every year there's only a couple people that pass the class Dronacti, and she does not have the opportunity to retake the class again next year, because if she fails this year, then she can be kicked out of her house basically for the summer, and then the will go into effect, which means Cesennios has to stay in the house for 21 days by himself. So she's got a lot of pressure to pass this class, and she forms a study group, and she starts to open up to them very, very slowly and form those connections again, because she has deprived herself of all human companionship ever since June was taken. And she has just been in such a dark, lonely, terrible place. So along with the mystery of who took June and what things that are going on within the university, there is, of course, the the subplots of her trying to pass her classes. She has a few other classes, but they really just focus on Dernacti, which is where a lot of the philosophy and the background and the history comes into play. And I found all of that really interesting. I really liked the university setting. I really liked the idea of the houses and how you can set a house law. So all of the perimeter houses have set a law to keep everybody out of the university so nobody can enter. So our quote, our Owl Crate quote of the day is, "No soul can enter Uxley without an invitation." And that's a direct result of the magic of the houses coming together to keep everybody out who is not invited in. And there's only 2 houses that can set their own house law, and one of them, of course, is going to be Cadan, and the other one is Dean Ferris, and they're special because they're the 2 founding houses. And so she spends a lot of time trying to figure out what her house law is first and trying to master her house so that she can set her own house law later. And it's within the mastering of the house that we really explore her psyche, and we really get to see just how deeply wounded and messed up her thinking is. And she's got a spot in here where she's like, oh, was June really like this, or has my mind just twisted it around to make her seem more demanding or more hurt? Like she would be horribly upset that I haven't found her yet. And am I doing that? Is my mind twisting that? Or is that really the way she would be? And so those types of questions are asked. And we get to explore her psyche, and we get to explore Ceseños just a little bit through her. And it's exploring the character of Ceseños, which is her house vampire, the one that she believes kidnapped June, and she's trying to get everybody to realize that he kidnapped June, and they don't believe her. And so their relationship is another subplot, and they are so mean to each other. Like, he pulls some pretty bad pranks on her when she first arrives, and he's trying to get rid of her and drive her off, and because he wants to inherit the house. And she does some really, really terrible things to him as well, besides just accusing him of kidnapping June. And their play back and forth is especially their public social play back and forth, how they keep trying to one up each other and tear down the other person. All at the same time, they're bound by these rules of Uxley, which is like, he can't touch her, he can't harm her, otherwise there's very serious consequences, and like the same with her. So they're doing a very intricate social dance, but they're a bit vicious to each other, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I get into my spoiler section. And I really thought that the reveals that came at the end of the book were very impactful. And that's all I'm going to say here. If you like vampire books, I would definitely pick it up. I can see where there's the inspiration with like the vampires falling in love with the human girl, and I wouldn't really say, I mean, it's marketed as, it's got like, there's like a very small like romantic subplot. Mostly they hate each other for the whole book, and I wouldn't even call it like enemies to lovers, because I'm not even sure that they're lovers at the end. But there's definitely a lot of sexual tension between them throughout the book, and so there's that plot. I'm gonna wait to get into more of the details till I get to my spoilery section. I've got a lot of notes on the spoiler section that I really want to go over and delve into, because there's a lot to think about for this book, and a lot to talk about, even more than the general overlay that I've already said. And so I enjoyed this book. I would give the language score a 6 out of 10, because they just like to use the F word you know, that's just like the only word that shows up, but it's not so over the top that I was like, oh, good grief, I'm gonna, I can't read this book. And I'm not a big fan of a lot of language in my books. And so it's not like it was every chapter. The chapters are really, really short. It's a good thing it's not every chapter, but there is a very good smattering of them throughout. And so I'm going to go ahead and give it a 6 out of 10 for that. And I want to talk about, before we get to the spoiler section, just so you know, that there are some plot problems that I have issues with. One of them that I can say is because it's at the very beginning, is that Karan and her sister June have way too much early childhood trauma that doesn't make any sense. So June is horrified, terrified, absolutely terrified of vampires. She has nightmares every single night about vampires, and it doesn't make any sense because nothing happened to them in their childhood. They were raised in a society where they were being bred to live along vampires, and there's no reason why she should have been so terrified of them, especially because she was being raised that vampires and humans coexist and live alongside each other, and that's what she was being taught. And of course, her parents died when she was very young, and yes, that is traumatic. But I mean, unless maybe she associated that with vampires, but there's no reason really why I thought that they should be so terrified of vampires and hate the vampire community so much, because there was, no vampire trauma. I don't want to say there was no trauma, because having your parents die when you're young is absolutely trauma, but there's no vampire specific trauma in their past. So that was kind of like, I'm not really buying that, but it was a little bit more of a minor point. And then there are some character decisions that are made that I'm like, I don't think that this character would really make this decision. I think that a theme of the novel is definitely people making bad decisions. There's a lot of bad decisions and bad choices that are made in this book. But even then, some of the decisions that are made, especially some of the decisions that launch the events at the end of the book, don't quite make a whole lot of sense. And I'm like, yeah, I really don't think that they would ever do that. That just doesn't jive with their character. And so, by no means is this book perfect. But I found it intriguing. I found it interesting, especially with the themes of choosing to live every day. And then there's a lot of hatred in this book. There's a lot. Karan has so much hatred bottled up inside of her, and she does some very impulsive things, and it spews out quite frequently, and she gets in trouble for that, and there's consequences that happen for that, and she's learning, and she's 18, 19, so she's still everybody's still having experiences, but she's still on the younger side of life, and having to navigate a lot of these traumatic experiences that she's been through. So anyway, that is my spoiler-free review, and now we're going to go into spoilers. So if you want to read the book and you have not read the book yet, go ahead and click off. And if you are not going to read the book, because I know this book may not be for everybody, I'm talking to you, Mom. You would not like this book. But if you're interested in hearing the discussion, because you just like to hear me talk, or maybe you're like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting, but I don't think I would like it. But anyway, here we go. Spoiler discussion. We are going to get started. Okay, so for the spoiler discussion section, instead of trying to go chronologically, I'm kind of just going to pick up scenes that I know I want to talk about, and maybe it might bounce around, and I'm sorry if it does, but that's just going to be the way my brain is going to work today. So I wanted to talk first about the scene where, and I've got this lovely page overlay, where Karan pulls out Susenyos' fangs. This was a very interesting scene because it had some pretty big ramifications later on. And this is one of those scenes where I didn't quite feel it, because what happened in the scene and then the consequences of that didn't seem to match up. And so what I'm getting at here is Sisenyos, obviously Khan took his flask, and so he's like, I need blood, and I'm about to like rip your throat out and you need to leave. And Khan, being Khan, is like, oh, I'm gonna stay here and watch you suffer. And so obviously Sisenyos, being the more mature of the two by maybe a little bit, he is able to control himself, but he's like, okay, you need to rip if you're gonna stay here, because I acknowledge that I can't kick you out. I'm not entirely sure why he didn't just leave. It's not like he's stuck in the house. He can leave whenever he wants. So instead of just leaving the house, he says, okay, well, if you're going to stay here, you need to rip out my fangs, because if you don't, I'm going to drain your blood, basically, and kill you. And so Kanan goes and gets the pliers, right? And she even has this moment of sympathy with him, says, like, this is gonna hurt. Like, just touching your fangs is causing you to wince in pain. And she decides, I'm not going to pull out your fangs, even though I want to watch you suffer. And so he goads her into doing it, forcing her basically to pull out his fangs. And by saying, this is how I drained June, I held her just like this. And of course that ignites her fire. And she rips him out. And I'm like, okay, fine. But then in the next several scenes, there's this whole big ordeal where he's super mad at her for pulling out his fangs. And I'm like, dude, you're the one who told her to do it. Like, you lied to her about June and forced her to pull out your fangs. You're the one who told her to go get the pliers and basically made her do it. And so I was kind of like, what? Like, this makes sense. He's like, oh, you need to apologize for pulling out my fangs. And I'm like, well, you're the one who made her do it. And there was so much drama and fallout over that scene that I was like, really? Because what happened, and then the way he's handling it later, like, his fangs grew back like overnight, right? Like, a couple days is what it seemed like. So I don't know that it would have been very public that he got, if it happened in private, I don't know that it would have been very public that he got his fangs pulled out. And so it was just really awkward, I thought, that he was like, you need to beg for forgiveness and say that you're sorry for pulling out my fangs. And then I love that she goes and gets his fangs as an article of clothing. You're reading it, and it's like, oh, he's gonna wish that he gave me his jacket and like every piece of clothing he had when I reveal my fangs. That was I did like that. So the response that she had to him, I thought was really good, because we're like, okay, we're gonna go on this track. But it's just the initial change from what actually happened in the event to what happened after that, and how we're now perceiving what's going on, I thought was a bit jarring and very inconsistent. So although I thought it was an interesting idea, the whole defanging was interesting, although I'm like, you could have, just left the house and gone to your vampire building for a little bit and gone and fed off of someone. I mean, like, come on. You didn't have to make her pull out your fangs, but okay. So that was something that I just needed to air my grievances about for a minute. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about was the messaging of the book. I've got my orange tabs I want to go over, because my orange tabs are the messaging that I feel like these are things where like the author is trying to get a message across. And some of these messages I think I agree with, and some of these messages I'm not sure if, because of what happens later on in the book when Kanan kind of realizes that her friends are maybe not really all that good people. because she's been casting them in this light of, you're a good person, even though you killed someone, you're still a good person, and she's clinging on to that. And part of that is, I think, because of her, because she killed someone, and it's the grace that she's giving to other people that she can't give to herself. And so some of these messages are interesting, and I'm gonna read a couple of them. All right, so after she crashes the car, this last paragraph talks about it says, every time she tried to leave him, he brought her back with the scent of violence. There was no need for promise of love or for quiet tenderness. Neither was allowed to feel the smallest spark of those afflictions. But perhaps their souls were made to be in eternal company, in devotion, in worship, in lust of brutality. And then there's another scene where she gets together, she's with Slen and with Yusef, and they're having a conversation about protecting themselves, and they're telling Yusef about the 13th and about what they did. And Yusef says right here, Yusef placed his head in his hands. This is hell. We're murderers. We're ruined. Kanan shut her eyes, afraid of this. No, Slen said strongly. We are tragedy itself. Nothing can ruin us unless we let it. I won't let it. So you have Yusef who's showing compassion, showing the horror of his actions, and then Slen immediately coming in and saying, no, you're wrong. We're tough. We are, we're tragedy itself. Nothing's going to ruin us. And then there's this quote over here. He had led Yusef to kill for her. Horror choked her words. What are you talking about? To show you that if you love them as they are for their natural wickedness, you can love yourself for yours. So this one's talking about loving yourself for your natural wickedness. And so what all of these quotes have in common, there's just one more. The feasting on violence made us friends. To this day, no one has understood my bloodthirst quite like him, first as human boys, then as young Drnaic men. That's a quote from Sisenos when he's talking about his friend. I was just thinking, like, as I was reading it, I'm like, is the author trying to make a point about, I mean, I know she says the question is who is the monster and who is the human, like who is good and who is bad. And she's definitely really pulling heavy on those strings. But the way that it's written makes me feel like she is saying that this is good, right? I feel like in a lot of these vampire books, it's very clear who's good and who's evil. And we know that killing is bad, but, you know, we know our heroes. There's a lot of books where heroes go and kill and fight, but they're fighting the evil, right? And these characters are killing selfishly. And I think that's the difference. And they're trying to say that killing selfishly is okay. And I know that comes around and ties back in at the end where they're like, actually, we wanted you to kill because that was a part of the bargain that was made to bind vampires, is that the humans had to kill, and they had to want to kill, and they had to experience what it was like to take life. And so I know that ties back in at the end, but some of the messaging in here seems to say, you know, love yourself at all costs. I'm all for, you know, loving yourself for who you are and overcoming your self-doubts and your self-hatreds. But I do feel like there's a little bit of maybe line crossing, at the very least, the blurring of the lines. Where are you trying to say that what this group of people is doing is good? Because what this group of people is doing is not good. Like what Kanan and Slen and Yusef are doing is not good, and you see that. And I think that that's why it's important not to DNF the book, because you start getting these messages in the beginning, but then you kind of see the fallout at the end, especially through GK. Please tell me his name is GK and not like two other letters. Anyway, he, being the Zabaya, the religious figure, he sees what they're doing, and he's horrified by them. And Kanan reading his journal and seeing how much he cares for them, and he when he figures out and he knows what they have done and how much that horrifies him, I think we get the counterbalance to everything that they've been doing, and then like the truth comes in and it hits Kanan all at once when we get into this section where she comes up and she says, I have seen them, where is it, for what they truly are after they've killed GK. And it says savages, right? It says Kadan recoiled from the blade from them and saw them for what they truly were, savages. And because that was another one of my parts in the book, this part where they kill GK, who was their friend, right? And he discovers that they had committed these murders, and he's confronting them about it, and said that he was basically going to go tell the authorities. And so Slen's response is to kill him. And so I was not entirely sure if that would be quite what she would do. Like, I know she's hard and she's cold, and she might. Like, I struggled less with Slen than I did with Yusef, because Yusef was much more gentle. And I mean, he of course killed too, but it almost broke him. And I don't think that he would have stabbed GK, even if Slen was there and stabbed him first and said, okay, now you need to. It seemed a little out of character for him. And I also didn't like how quickly they flipped from being like, we're going to kill him, and then Kadan comes in and freaks out and says, no, we're going to get him a death transformation. How quickly they go from, we're killing him, to, okay, we're bringing him back because Kadan's freaking out. And apparently this is what we're doing. So the whole part there, I was just kind of like, really? Would her friends flip that fast? Plus, death transformation is so taboo, and they've been raised in this society, not Kanan, but her friends, where it is taboo and it's illegal. I don't think that they would be so quick to hop on the death transformation phase, and especially, they all know that GK would never want that. They even mention it in here. They're like, no, just let him die. Like, he does not want to come back. And this tab right here, I've highlighted because this is where Kadan and GK are talking about death transformation. And it says GK's body stiffened. There's a forbidden one called death transformation. It's where humans can be changed after they die. Kanan's stomach turned after death. Her voice became hollow. I didn't even know that was possible. His eyes hardened. It can happen only in the early hours after death, before certain irreversible changes in the body take place, which they conveniently don't tell you what it is. Like with GK's death transformation, they're like, oh, he's out of time. Oh, he's almost out of time. Oh, we have to hurry. Oh, now he's out of time, but now Slen is holding his heart, and for some reason, if you hold your heart, it gives you more time. I was like, that could have had some more explaining. Like, I kind of feel like, oh, we wrote ourselves into a corner, and like, now I have to make up something. Like, that's what it felt like. And I was really just hoping that they would let GK pass away. I was like, oh, thank goodness that they came and they stopped it. Maybe he's not going to be death transformed, because we know that if he is transformed and becomes very violent and very bloodthirsty, that he's going to pretty much be the villain of the next book or the third book. Like, he's going to come back and he's going to be angry and he's going to want vengeance. And we're continuing this whole theme, right? This cycle. Kadan found comfort in his disgust. They were united in seeing evil when they imagined that scenario. So Kadan absolutely knows that he no way wants a death transformation, but she can't handle her own guilt at seeing him dead, and that her friends killed him, and that her whole world is completely shattered and in tatters. And so because of that guilt, she allows that to drive her to perform death transformation for GK, which is my biggest, like the biggest qualm that I have with the ending and how all of that goes down is that Sisenios would never let her leave and go find his court. Like, he knows they're gonna kill her. He tells her multiple times, well, I didn't tell you about it because you'd have just gone to your death earlier. Like, that's what their whole fight is about, and that led to the whole him getting shot with the impala horn. And he's so mad at her. It's like, why would he help her? Send his two closest friends out with her to protect her on this suicide mission? Like, he knows it's basically a suicide mission. He knows death transformation is forbidden, and there are going to be serious consequences inside Uxley if anybody finds out that they did this. Like, I just really, really, really don't think that Sisenios would not only condone, but provide her the means for going out and doing this for GK. Like, he even says, just let him die. And she's like, I can't. And he's just kind of like, tough. Like, these are the consequences of your actions. And of course, because she goes out, the consequences of the actions get way, way bigger. But I really like the very end of the book. I thought it was great that she had her master the house at the very end of the book when she sees June. Oh, and speaking of that, we got to go back to the big reveal. Like, when we find out that June wasn't kidnapped all this time. Oh my goodness. Like, did anybody else just like freak out when they found that? When Kadan comes back and she has the message from June and she's like, oh, I ran away and I didn't tell you about it. I was like, you idiot. Like, again, going back to that theme of making bad choices, right? It's like, you could have written her a letter that said, hey, I'm leaving. I'm not kidnapped. Like I'm leaving. You have a good life, right? You could have left something that was like very obvious so she didn't think that you were stolen. And so, like, it's just so crazy because we spent the whole book, it's all June. Like, it got to the point where I was kind of like, I'm tired of hearing about June. Like, let's work on getting over this, Kadan. Let's work on moving on. And then at the end, it's just like, pow! Like, June was never kidnapped. Like, she ran off with the vampires. She wanted to go. And so it's just like, I don't know, my brain like exploded. And so I thought that was a really great twist because it just completely in one moment upends your whole sense of how things are and your sense of reality, and completely changes your feelings for these characters. I'm like, I'm gonna go punch her in the face. Just, made me so mad at her. And then she just like comes in at the end. She's like, hey. And you're like, you were just so stupid. You can't even fathom what your sister's been going through to try to find you. And so Kadan's mastering the house in that moment because it's just the epitome of all of her turmoil and rage and everything all just comes to a head right there in her emotions. And she is able to master it in that moment that she sees June after she's been through hell for like a year, and then realizes that her sister basically betrayed her. And then I just thought that was really good. Ending the book right there. It was good. So I will definitely be reading the second book. Absolutely. I gave this book 4 stars. I might be a little generous because I liked it. There's just so many thoughts. I can keep talking, but this is getting to be a really, really long video and I'm going to have to edit it. I don't know. It just seemed to really, with the messaging and like the good, what's good, what's evil, is this, and getting caught up in that whole, is this good or is this evil? And, oh, they wanted us to kill all along. Like, this is what they wanted us to do. Like, I just really liked it. Even though I have issues with how the ending came about, I liked it, the ending. So anyway, I am really interested to hear all of your thoughts in the comments below. I know this was a really long video, so thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time. Bye.